Here we
Dana.
are. Okay, we're being recorded. Great. So this is the Just Transition Subcommittee meeting of the Climate Council on February 10th. It's so lovely to see everyone again in the deepest part of our winter here. I think it's helpful just to do a little check-in and welcome, and if people want to use the chat box to do that, that would be great. Just introduce yourself, both subcommittee members and guests. It's nice to know who's in the room with us today, and staff. That would be great. And if you are feeling so inclined and want to share share in the practice of gratitude, maybe in the chat box you can also share something you feel grateful for as it pertains to winter. So I work in the Agency of Human Services, and so we think a lot about trauma-informed care and what are the practices we need to cultivate to be more resilient, and gratitude is actually one of those. So I want to encourage that. So I'll kick it off, though, and just, because I'm not going to multitask chat box and talk, and I'll say I'm really grateful for the deep, deep snow, which makes it so lovely and fun to play outside with my kids. Great, so with that, as people are introducing themselves in the chat box and sharing their gratitudes, thank you, everyone. I will also see if anyone, I'll walk through the agenda in a minute, but we had our minutes were posted back from December. So anyone have any comments or questions on the minutes? Okay, then we'll consider those accepted. And then let's walk through the agenda today. So after our welcome and beginning part here, we want to spend just a little bit of time giving some updates on where the Climate Council is at, and then also some legislative updates, because there's a lot of things happening in the legislature. So I think I'm poised to hand that off to Jane to talk through some of those updates. And then we wanted to spend most of today talking through our 2022 work plan and goals. David, I think, is going to help facilitate that conversation. What does the year ahead look like for us? What are we trying to accomplish? What do we need to accomplish? And want to honor that Chris keeps pulling us back to our obligations as a committee to serve the council in terms of equity and what that looks like. So we'll come back to that conversation as we map out the year. We'll pause for some public comments. And then at the end of the meeting, we just thought as we sort of launch into this year, it could be helpful to revisit our membership as a subcommittee. Are there new members we want to invite into this work with us? Affirming people's ongoing participation, liaison to other subcommittees, staff for the committees, and then co-chairs. So just kind of to come back to that at the end. So that's our agenda. And the only thing I would add is maybe a little other business that we can come to at the end, or we could discuss now, which is that many folks, although not everyone, got an invitation from the University of Vermont to participate in, I think they're calling it a symposium, and inviting us to come and share on the work of this subcommittee. And so maybe we can just come back to that at the end of the meeting as well to see who might be interested in participating in that. And for those of you who did not see that invitation, it's okay. I will forward it to you after the meeting today so you can see the full invitation. If I can even multitask, I'll do it in the middle of our meeting. But many of you did see it. So, any questions on the agenda? Anything else that we should add? I want to make sure we talk about today. Okay. Well, with that, we're ahead of schedule. I love that as a facilitator. And I also am loving people's gratitudes. It's so great. But I think I'll hand it over to you, Jane, to just walk through some Climate Council updates.
Afternoon, everybody. It's so nice to see you all and everybody who's actually around the table and still with us after in the new year. So glad you're all here and look forward to David helping guide the conversation later about work planning. I'll give a brief update and then pause and then look forward to touching on some of the legislative updates, but know many of you are engaged in so many of them too, and hope that others will speak to them as well. So the council itself has met once in the new year. We met a few weeks ago in January and don't have a next meeting scheduled, but I'll talk a little bit about council work planning and what the expectation is going into the next few months for the council. That meeting was really nice in January, where we were able to come back and council members, subcommittee members, as well as state staff were encouraged to participate in a survey that we are grateful for Marion to putting together to stand up for you all to reflect on process over the last year in order to carry forward with us into our work over the next year and indefinitely, really lessons learned and what we can do better and apply not only to climate action plan writing, but also the process more broadly. And so the council had the benefit of seeing some of those survey results, leaning into the conversation and breaking into small groups to reflect on the past year as a council and takeaways. That survey is now, we left it open for 2 more weeks past the council meeting to encourage more participation. I believe it was roughly, and Marion can correct me, 21 folks who participated in the survey, council members, subcommittee members, state staff. And so Marion is pulling together a summary based on themes as was presented at the council meeting for us to post publicly and share with all of you as we were committed to do based on that. So that was a large component of the meeting. And we also started to look forward to the coming year and what some of the work priorities would be for the council. And that set some expectations up for steering committee meetings as well as council meetings. Just briefly from that meeting, if Marion hasn't, oh yeah, Marion just dropped in the chat, maybe we could put a video or some notes from that meeting also, because we also adopted, I wanted to draw everybody's attention to a land acknowledgement at that meeting. There was a placeholder in the climate action plan for a land acknowledgement. Judy Dow had supported the council at a meeting in December, led us through a process to put words on paper and think through how to develop one. And she was great. We were grateful to work with her between the December meeting and the January meeting, and another counselor, Bram Klepner, to actually pull all of those words together, really the counselor's words, into a coherent land acknowledgement that the council had read aloud by Bram because Judy wasn't able to be with us, and then adopted for inclusion. And that's been updated and inserted in the climate action plan now. So I encourage folks to look at it and read it. It's really beautiful. And it was a really great process with Judy. So we were really appreciated her time working with us on that.
And Marion just put it in the chat if you want to check it out. It is really beautiful.
Thank you. And one other comment just about that council meeting for folks who are interested. We had some great presents. You may remember that at the beginning of our council meetings, we do a Just Transitions moment. And the beginning of that meeting focused on language and the way we speak about climate change and in order to make it accessible. And we had some sociologists from California, actually, who study that explicitly came in and gave us a brief presentation and had a conversation with the council about it. That I thought was really great. So that's part at the beginning of the video also. Based on that council meeting, there was a clear direction of some discrete work objectives for the council over the course of the next year. You may remember that there were some components around in the climate action plan that were tabled at the end or fell apart due to timing, largely in the transportation space, because we don't, the main policy driver for reducing our emissions in the transportation space was joining the TCIP program, which was a regional cap and invest program that fell apart a week before, after 10 years of work and all the states ready to sign on. A week before the climate action plan was signed, Massachusetts and Connecticut pulled out, and that was sort of the main policy driver for reducing transportation emissions. There's now a work group very deeply involved in thinking about what public engagement, what technical analysis, what we need to bring policies forward to the council to approve and adopt as a addendum to the plan in the coming year. There's also a work group for biomass actions, which were tabled from the climate action plan with an effort to look at more broadly, because those were developed by the Ag and Ecosystem Subcommittee. Those folks will still take a leading role and also have input from cross-sector mitigation, as well as, I think, representation from someone from science and data also thinking about that. Those groups are either up and running or have their first meeting scheduled. And there's also been a task group that I know we'll talk about with all of you later in your work planning around public engagement that has been meeting quite regularly. We've been meeting like 4 or 5 times already to really refine what the public engagement strategy is going to look like, both in the short term and how we set up long-term systems to have in place for success and commitment to working with Vermonters into the future on these efforts. So there's these discrete tasks that are starting to take form in task groups. There's the council objectives itself and the need to meet based on when things are going to be coming up. And the next meeting for the council will be scheduled for March. We just haven't done that yet because we're working with the steering committee to set a schedule. But the main impetus for that meeting in March will be around budget implications and priorities around technical analysis and really refining that work schedule for the whole year. But the council likely after March won't meet again until May or June, really what is called for to come together to review rulemaking that the Agency of Natural Resources is putting forward. The council is written into statute to review those rules before they get presented to ICAR. So the steering committee is meeting on Monday. We'll be looking at budget. We'll be looking at your work around public engagement, and then we'll put forward a schedule for the council after that. So I'll pause there. That's a lot, and happy to take any questions or pivot to legislative updates if you'd like.
Any questions for Jane on sort of what the Climate Council and all the groups are kind of doing, how that's going to come together this year, what some next steps are? Okay. Is a lot. Maybe as a reminder, because it has been a while since we met, for the folks, many members of our subcommittee are on that public engagement work group. Maybe people just want to like raise their hand and we can remember like who's been participating in that working group. Kelly, Ashka, David, Amanda, great, Carrie. Okay, and others are welcome to join into that group as well. So we will kind of come back to that a little bit. Jane, why don't you go ahead and pivot to legislative then?
And is there, just to be clear, there is time later through the work planning conversation to talk about what that group's been up to? Okay, just want to make sure. Thanks. So I know in our conversation preparing for today, other co-chairs are deeply involved in some of the bills that are pertinent to this group. There's a lot of action in the legislature directed straight from the Climate Action Plan. I think that I'll defer to Abby and others who want to speak to the environmental justice bill, but that is very active, and I'm sure folks on the subcommittee would really like to know where that stands. I'm happy to do that, but I know, Abby, you've been tracking it as well. Just related to other actions in the climate plan, the clean heat standard is sort of the centerpiece of emissions reductions this legislative session. There is House Energy and Technology has been taking the lead on the clean heat standard, but that went to Finance and Appropriations this week. Also, we are hopeful that that will get traction and move forward. I'll happily drop in a summary one-page document that the Energy Action Network has prepared on the clean heat standard, which really is helpful just to understand what it's doing, but it's the primary policy driver to reduce emissions in the buildings and thermal space, knowing that it must be coupled also with weatherization, which is so critical in the space. And that is another bill that the state staff and others are starting to coordinate on, knowing that Senate Natural Resources and Energy will be taking up weatherization in the coming week or two. So those are the main emissions reductions bills right now, but there's also a lot of movement changes to Act 250, which are called for in the Climate Action Plan, as well as changes to the way we can manage and enroll old forests in current use, which was a direct recommendation of Ag and Eco to have more flexibility to not manage forests in current use, and that seems to be actually on a very successful track right now. And those are sort of the main highlights. We've been doing climate action plan summaries to lots of committees: Senate Agriculture, Senate Natural Resources, House Energy and Technology, House Agriculture and Forestry, House Natural Resources, and it's been really a wonderful sort of roadshow where we do a summary, but also have key steering committee members and or co-chairs from committees that are relevant to that legislative committee in with us to dive into some of the recommendations in deeper detail. So it's been exciting to sort of take the plan out to the legislature and then see what they act on and pick up from there. Chris, go ahead, because I know you've been part of those.
Yeah, I'll just note, I've been asked to testify on S96, which was proposing the creation of a state planning office, and this came up in cross-cutting issues in the climate action plan. And what I'm testifying is, and I'm testifying only for myself. I explicitly note that I'm not testifying on behalf of the council or RPCs or even our own Wyndham Regional Commission. But what I'm suggesting is that the act instead adopt the recommendation that came out of cross-cutting to take the approach of look at the land use plan and policy, and then from there consider whether or not a state land use office is warranted and necessary. I also note that the administration had a dissenting opinion on that. But so I'm not opposed to a statewide planning office, but rather than create a committee to kind of justify a planning office's existence, instead turn it on, basically flip it around to what the climate action plan recommends. So just FYI, just recommending that's just my own position, professional position. But by all means, if folk have another opinion about that, they should weigh in. The hearing is, I believe, next Wednesday.
So go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I thought I want to make sure, were you basically done, Jane? Because I did have a few things I wanted to add.
Yeah, I did. In no way was comprehensive, so appreciate others adding in, and hope if others don't want to, I'm happy to speak to some of the more specifics on the environmental justice bill, but hope others will.
So I actually was going to do a little bit on environmental justice, but especially because I think it relates a lot to our work and emphasizing some of our ongoing work around public engagement, which is also coming up, as I understand it, with the clean heat standard discussion. So just to recognize the environmental justice bill is I think a real opportunity for the work we've been talking about. First of all, it establishes environmental justice as a policy, and many of, I think, the members of this committee and other allies have really been involved in some of the formulation of this bill. But it also actually defines a term, environmental justice populations, which I think tries to also replicate some of the work we did in our guiding principles that really talk about impacted communities and frontline communities. They don't use those terms, but I think there's a lot of parallels, I would say. Some might feel like there are things missing from how that is being presented in that bill, so I want to kind of raise that. And it talks a lot about adopting community engagement plans with an actual deadline. I'm not sure the current status, someone can update me, but the deadline felt too soon when I first read it. And I'm concerned that we not go back to rushing. But I'm also really excited because it's going to create an environmental justice working group and an environmental justice advisory council. And for me, I feel like that's potentially, if it passes, going to embrace a lot of the work we're doing, and maybe be kind of the next phase or step for our work to be ongoing without us to have to continue to be ongoing. And I'm lifting that up because I think it's important for us to see where we are, where we're going, but there may even be, if this passes, another entity to carry forth. There's other things that we all have talked about, a mapping tool that is actually looking at sort of the impact and the populations that we are called to focus on in looking towards just transitions. And it does something that we talked about, which is establishing a floor for investment for the benefits to go to the historically marginalized, the frontline communities that we've been talking about. And the floor established is much higher than anything we've been talking about. It's actually 55%. Now this is environmental spending, but all of those points, and that's just the high level, are very significant, and I think very much in concert with many of the ideas that we have talked about and put forward, and even specifically put forward in our guiding principles, as well as in the implementation of our work in the climate action plan. So I just kind of wanted to lift that up. I think it shows the importance of our work. It makes me feel like people are listening and that there is a future for the ideas that we've been generating to grow. So that's important to me. I haven't been involved other than sort of trying to keep track. If someone, and I bet CLF Mason might be able to tell us or put it in the chat, if that bill is being heard at some point, or even if it's not, I would encourage folks to look at it. If anyone can put it in and write letters to your senators. It's starting the bill now in Senate Natural Resources and Energy Committee. And Sarah and I did attend one of the early sessions to describe our work and our guiding principles. So, and I believe Kashka was there too. Sorry, Kashka, I'm not even remembering. So I'm just saying that's a really important bill for you all to pay attention to. And then the other thing I would just mention, because I was called about it recently, maybe it was yesterday, the clean heat standard, which is kind of, you know, geeky and very energy focused, is also because of the, I think, testimony on our work, the message that we've put out, they're talking about a public engagement strategy as this whole idea, which is a new idea and complex, evolves, that we begin now on a thoughtful public engagement strategy around educating people successfully in the right language, accessible language, about this big idea that's being discussed. So again, this issue of public engagement is really having some legs in other places, which I think you should know and feel good about. And those are the things I wanted. Oh, one last thing is the governor's budget you didn't mention, Jane. And of course, that's just the beginning of the fun that happens in the legislature, but it did include, in my mind, it's very significant because it included a whole office on climate, which has been missing. But again, this would be a place to hold the multifaceted work of this action plan and even of our committee. I didn't see any specific funding for public engagement, which worries me. I'm putting it out there. Okay. That's all I want to say. Sorry for speaking too long.
I'd be happy to share with you all the Climate Action Office white paper, and in the Climate Action Office paper that was put together to get the governor to support the addition of it in the budget, we envisioned 5 of the positions are existing positions within the Agency of Natural Resources to be shifted into the Climate Office. 3 are new positions, one being a community engagement equity program manager for long term. So there's a new position intended to focus in the Climate Office just on this work. So there's funding for a new position.
Great. so Sue was kind of lifting up two things. One is the environmental justice bill, and the other was clean heat standard. And we do have a few more minutes. Carrie, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to the conversation, or were you saying Abby's following the EJ bill? I thought Carrie was following the EJ bill. Anyway, if anyone wants to add anything on the environmental justice bill, I did see Carrie added something in the chat box around that as well.
Oh, I don't think I have anything to add. I think it's, you know, the agency's done a lot of testimony on it, and now other agencies and departments are weighing in. And I think everyone's generally supportive of it, but some of the time deadlines and capacity of state agencies to take on the work are two of the main things that have been identified.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Kashka.
I think that my only issue with hearing, and I haven't read it, kind of looking forward to it, but it would be with having deadlines on engagement as well. I think that just doesn't make much sense to me, considering it should be ongoing always, especially with when you're building relationships with communities that haven't been reached out to before, really, or engaged.
Chris, is that a new hand?
Yeah, I've been asked to testify. I'm in support of S148 too, and I've offered to Senator Bray that I'm happy to do so. There's another bill. I'm looking up where it's standing. I'm trying to remember. Transportation innovation, has it actually been entered? It's already been filed, right? Transportation Innovation Act. So folks should be aware of that one too. There's a lot in there that would begin to address the transportation items in the climate action plan. I've been following a lot of things in transportation, and I participated in or attended a workshop on that one, but there's a lot going on in transportation right now, including how to use the infrastructure bill dollars. So Ross, I don't know if you have anything about the agency's perspective on all that. I know it is a lot to try to follow.
I really don't, Chris. You know, it's all in discussion and evolving on a daily basis. You know, the proposals are being vetted, and I've participated in discussions with the House, but nothing really to report now other than what we've provided in the testimony.
Great, thanks. Amanda.
I just want to lift up what Claire said in the chat about the timeline for public engagement for state offices, which I guess I have mixed feelings about. Like 2025 seems like definitely a lot of wiggle room for state offices to like get a really solid plan in place and do some thoughtful planning and get feedback. But at the same time, it's like, is it too long of a timeline? But that's just my opinion. But I just want to note that change deadline, because I forget what it was when we first saw the EJ bill, but it might have been like 2023, which seemed a little unrealistic.
Thanks, Amanda. And I would encourage folks, we can, people are welcome to share their opinions on the legislation in this meeting, but of course, to truly have it have influence on the legislation itself, right? Reach out to the committees that are doing that work, right? That's where those voices really need to be taken. So not to silence the conversation, that's not my intent, but just to say, like, saying it in this meeting doesn't have the same impact. And so I just want to call that out. And I did earlier send out the links to the committee web pages and their YouTube channels where you can actually watch testimony. You can go back, you can watch it at night. It's kind of this amazing thing. So maybe what I'll do is send out some of that again so that if people want to check back in, and I can even try to identify like which committees are kind of doing which bills right now, because there's a lot flying around in this conversation around this committee is doing this bill and this committee is doing EJ and da-da-da, and it gets a little crazy. So as a follow-up, I'm happy to just kind of resend that out again, flagging a couple of things so people want to keep following it, they can do that. Abby.
Yeah, maybe this is too much detail for this time, because I like what you're suggesting, Sarah, of just encouraging people to watch testimony if you're interested. But around S-148, both Agency of Agriculture and Agency of Transportation had an opportunity to testify before Senate Natural Resources. And some of the major takeaways were that at least all agency feedback on the bill was recommended by Senate Natural Resources to go to the Agency of Natural Resources, as they're sort of functioning as the hub for this bill, and that there's an opportunity for what they refer to as a fiscal note for state agencies to put forth what their estimate is of what implementation will cost, and that that's going to come from the Joint Fiscal Office. So I think while everyone's thinking about how this bill impacts state agencies and the partners, there's also a lot of conversations around how do we get those comments to the right place and recognize that there is not yet currently a budget attached for that community engagement process and the like, but that will hopefully take place in the coming weeks. So that's just one little bit on one of the bills.
Great, thank you. And there's a lot going on in the chat box, and so maybe when I send out those notes, I'll try to clip the chat box and throw some of those links in there for people. I think I saw a question in there, Sue. Did you have a question for somebody?
Sorry, I did. It relates to translation services, and I know we've talked about those a lot here. And I know, Jane, that you've put some real time and thought into that and resources. So I didn't know if this might be a time. It's also possible that it will come up in our discussion with David, but if I want to make sure we cover that.
We can cover it when we talk about the actions going forward with engagement and the small group work.
Great. And Chris, is that a new hand?
Yeah, one last, Jane, you may have mentioned this and I just missed it. One of the first acts that was passed actually was a recommendation from the Climate Action Plan about creating fully remote meeting options. Did you say that, Jane, and I missed it?
I didn't, but how could I not? Marianne and I are both at home right now. If you notice, we are not in an office building because we don't have to be anymore. So, yes, Marianne and I really like that one.
But that was actually a recommendation in the CAP. So already the first pieces of legislation passed out this session. So that's extended through January 2023. But the various government operations committees are going to continue to look at equity and efficacy and other aspects related to open meeting law and remote participation. And so it's not a done deal, but that was to at least immediate term, create that opportunity so that you don't have folk going to physical locations just to be there by themselves. And I have to note that for our staff and for other staff that it actually creates some security issues when you send a lone staff person to staff a meeting by themselves in a location with nobody else there. It actually creates some other issues. So anyway, that discussion is going to continue. So if you're interested in that issue, that's another one to follow as I continue to discuss it.
Great, thanks, Chris. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to David, who's gonna kind of facilitate this next session. Oh my gosh, I can't talk. Section, helping us to think about our work plan for the year. Thanks, David.
You bet. Okay. All right. Well, hi, everybody. It's good to see everybody. As a subcommittee, you all need to have a plan for this year, right? What is it you really want to do in 2022? And what do you think you're required to do under the statute? I know that's something that Chris Campany, you've been trying to emphasize a couple times. So we wanted to have that conversation tonight, right? Or this afternoon, about where do you want to invest your time as a subcommittee this year. Jane gave a little window into how the work is getting done this year around the council, right? This year, we're having these task groups, just like we have this public engagement task groups that some of you are working on. There's a couple other task groups. Jane mentioned them around biomass, another around transportation. Those task groups pull from across the different subcommittees in a smaller group to get a bunch of ideas together, and then they get bumped up into the subcommittees and they'll get bumped up into the council. So that's the way the work is happening this year with the council. And the council has a handful of issues that they're looking at: transportation, biomass. There may be one other or two others. And that's what the council is going to be doing, in addition to overseeing some technical reports that are coming out and some of the rulemaking that the state agency has to do, that ANR has to do. Okay, so that's the council. And then having these task groups feed up into subcommittees, feed up into the council. That's what's going to happen. You all, as Just Transitions, need to figure out what you really want to emphasize this year, right? And what it means for you as an overall subcommittee, and whether you want to use that same method of task groups feeding up into you and you feed up into the council. We know there's a couple key things that you really, really have said you want to focus on. One is the public engagement, the stakeholder engagement work. So we know you want to look at that, and you have a task group of some of you already putting some good ideas together around that. We'll talk about that tonight. There are other things you may want to get engaged on. Things such as there's a municipal vulnerability tool that's being developed in a task group. And there's a lot of issues around equity and just transitions that are relevant to that municipal vulnerability tool, right? So that's something that you might want to spend some time, and some of you get involved in that task group. And then in your big meetings like this, you could look at those issues. So I think where I'm trying to go with this is we need to set a set of ideas that are going to be our focal ideas for the year, and then imagine how the work actually gets done. Most of the subcommittees are meeting once a month, something like that, to go over what's coming up out of those task groups. You all could meet once a month as well, or maybe even a little bit less frequently, potentially. Right? And then you need to think about how you want to spend that time and how you want to orient each other in the work you're doing in the task groups or being liaisons to the subcommittees. All right, so that's what I'd like to do tonight with you all. Chris, as we get into this, I'd be interested to sort of hear you talk about how you see the potential responsibilities of this subcommittee being unique based on the statute. And I can pull up the language if that's helpful as we talk about it. But I know I've heard you say it a couple times, so I just want to create that space for you to like say what's going on with that, because it seems pretty important.
If you can pull that up, David, that'd be real helpful.
Yeah.
So one of the odd things that the Global Warming Solutions Act did was it charged not the council as an entity, as a whole, but this subcommittee with ensuring. I'll read it. You can see it right there. The subcommittee shall focus on ensuring that strategies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to build resilience to adapt to the effects of climate change, benefit and support all residents of the state fairly and equitably. That's a big sentence right there. That's a big responsibility for a subcommittee. This subcommittee shall ensure that strategies consider the disproportionate impact of climate change on rural, low-income, and marginalized communities, and that programs and incentives for building resilience are designed to be accessible to all Vermonters and do not unfairly burden any groups, communities, geographic locations, or economic sectors. This subcommittee may adopt a measurement tool to assess the equitability of programs and strategies considered by the council. So it almost reads to me like it's putting us in a watchdog position. And I'm not an attorney. Have to read a lot of legislation and act in response to it, but it doesn't say that the subcommittee shall focus on the ensuring of strategies to reduce yada 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 are just in the cap. And it doesn't say that we're to ensure strategies consider disproportionate impacts. I mean, I guess you could take it that it's limited to just what's in the cap, but and then I don't know that we would want to. But anyway, I just thought we need to think about our role, our ongoing role, given what the Global Warming Solutions Act has proposed. I'll note that I have not been sheepish about saying that when the Global Warming Solutions Act is revisited, the council should be tasked with this, not just a subcommittee thereof. But anyway, we should be aware of that and think about what our role should be. Recognizing also the limitations we've all spoken about. We've given them the limitations on our time and capacity to meet and give energy and effort to bird dogging the plan now that it's been created.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris. Okay. So that's a dilemma for us, right? What really are we being asked, you as a subcommittee being asked to do? And again, as Chris says, it's not really clear like what's going on there, right? Ensuring that the strategies that end up in the cap, right, or ensuring going forward, right, it's not really specified. So I guess you as a subcommittee just need to say, we feel our level of responsibility is X, right? And certainly the work you did last year in developing the just transitions principles in scoring rubric, goes a long, long way towards this, right? And now the question is, going forward, where do you see your role? And given the time that you all have to dedicate to this. Okay. Do others want to say something about how they perceive the role of the Just Transition Subcommittee based on this language or based on just your understanding of what we're doing here? Any other reactions to this? Sue?
I appreciate, Chris, your sort of having very strict constructionist reading of this. For myself, I believe that we have gone a long way, to use David's words, towards meeting this charge as we kind of defined it, as we thought about this at the beginning of our process, by creating our guiding principles and the tool, and that it's our work moving forward, in my opinion, not to, hold everyone to a task that absolutely ensures this, but to really pushing forward on sort of the tools we may be able to use, including our guiding principles, including the rubric, and including the focus on public engagement that is very different from the norm as we've discussed it. So for me, that, checks the box, but that's just my humble opinion, because I don't feel that we have the authority to do really much more than that, frankly, irrespective of how you might want to read that language.
Thanks, Sue. Any other reactions to this? I'm happy to drop the screen so we can see each other too a little bit better. Okay. All right. So I'm going to put some ideas out there, and I think we just need to start shouting it out. And I'd be interested to hear from folks who, folks who haven't had a chance to weigh in yet tonight and this afternoon in this meeting. When we think about investing our time this year, the things that immediately come to mind are the public engagement, stakeholder engagement, which we're going to hear a little bit more about in just a moment. the other tasks that are relevant for our work, for instance, municipal vulnerability tool that's going to be developed that's very relevant for our work. And there may be other pieces, like when we start talking about biomass or talking about transportation, those things are all relevant for us in the just transitions principles and rubric we have. And so when you think about this year, you think about those topical areas, making sure some of you are involved in those conversations and task groups, and then meeting periodically, maybe once a month or so, to check in on that and see how that's going. Like, that's where my head goes when I think about a work plan. But I want to lift up for others to hear where your heads go. Iris, did you want to jump in?
Sorry, no, I'm just rejoined, sorry.
That's okay. I thought you were trying to come off mute. I'd be interested, like, does that feel compelling as a vision going forward, that there's a set of issues that you are involved in through task groups or sitting in on other subcommittees, and you bring that back to, say, a monthly meeting of this group here to see how that's going, and then this group makes any decisions about lifting something up to the council? Sarah?
Yeah, no, I like that. I like that construct of having smaller groups that can move forward things and bringing it back. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I put it in the chat box, but the conversation is making me go back to some of the work we did around recommendations moving forward. And we had, I don't know if folks remember this, but we had a set of recommendations sort of around public engagement to move forward. And then we had a set of recommendations around committing to the ongoing use of the principles. And then we had a set that was really kind of coming back to this idea of accountability and what does ongoing accountability look like. And Beverly, I'm remembering some good conversations I think that we had around that in particular. And I don't know that we were assigning all this work to our subcommittee. I think we were just saying these are good things that should happen. But it kind of makes me think about, does some of that make sense to be work of our subcommittee? And a couple of things as I kind of quickly looked at it again. And again, I'd love to hear from Beverly and some others who did some more thinking on this. But we had thought about how do we know we're being successful in terms of measuring equity impact, like the impact of our work? Like, what are the metrics around this, or how do we measure that, or how do we expect other people to be measuring it, right? So we're not the implementers. Other people are going to do the work of the climate action plan, but we want them to be measuring and looking at equity as part of that work. And how do they do that in an ongoing way? And could we, think about some metrics to support them with? Of course, much smarter people in the country have done lots of thinking on this already. We could borrow from some of that. So that's one thought. Another one is we had thought about how data comes together to be presented in a way that's transparent and easy to digest. And we had thought about, and maybe that's much bigger than our group. But then the other one is this idea of a just transitions kind of progress report that kind of, is coming back to this conversation around how are we doing and what else should we be doing. And so I don't know, I'm putting those out there as, I don't know if that's area of work that we think we should be doing as a subcommittee.
Great. Yeah. How do others feel about that? Like, and it's lifting up what's been said in the actual climate action plan. Beverly, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I think that the accountability part is really, really crucial, because it's so easy for people to come to a meeting and make a decision on change, and that's the end of it. They never come back to find out who is it really impacting and who's really benefiting. And I think as a Just Transitions group, we do have to have a segment of our group focusing in on, looking at some of the bills that are being, presented. Are they really addressing some of our concerns? Or are they just sort of, washing over them and using rhetoric? And I know that some of the language, is probably above my pay grade that they use in their bills, but it almost feels like they're afraid to talk about the marginalized community as human beings, as the Black population, the Native population, the disabled population. I don't see that being named, and I think that for a lot of people who are part of those marginalized groups, if they don't see themselves in the bills, then they don't feel like it's benefiting them, and they're going to lose interest. And that's just my take on it. And in talking with others who don't feel like the Climate Council is really going to pay any attention to just transitions work. And so I spent a lot of time saying, no, I think it is going to make a difference. Don't feel that way. And people have talked about weatherization and said, what good is it going to do if I have a house that's full of drafts, and they're going to come and they're going to give me a water heater blanket? How's that going to take care of keeping my home warm? It's conversations like that I've been hearing, and I think that we really need to come together to hold them accountable. And I feel like that should be a large part of the work that we're doing this year. Thank you.
Thanks, Beverly. How could we see that work happening, right? How could we do that effectively? Should it use the same sort of task group structure where some of you just really are paying attention and you bring that back to this group? Or is there another way? Chris?
One thing in the immediate term, I'll put in a chat for people who, talk about, for people who can't see it, is, I'm continuing to, well, I guess I'm a member of the cross-sector mitigation group. I began as a liaison, right? And as did Kelly. And one of the things I think we need to keep an eye on is that the other subcommittees that are moving forward on policy discussions and other things are taking the time, making the time to engage with the public, because the clock is not ticking as fast now, right? So what I was advocating for the transportation task force group was, like, they'd come up with a group of really solid recommendations, but my suggestion was, before bringing that back to the council, why not take that out to the public and have some deliberation on it? So before it comes to the council for a decision, get some public involvement on it around the issue. And so my thinking is that all of us, if we can continue that liaison function, that could be really helpful, just to remind folk about, some of the other principles, like moving at the speed of trust, all the different process issues and substantive issues that we bring out in they're brought out in the principles. So I don't know if we've got if folk have the bandwidth to do that. Jane, I'm not following all the different subcommittee meetings, but does it feel like maybe it's more manageable than what it was before? No.
It's gotten even more complex, perhaps. Well, because a lot of the work's happening in these task groups, right? Transportation, for instance, going on in that task group, and then it'll get lifted up into the subcommittees. But yeah, I hear you, Chris. It's like the accountability is from a legislation standpoint. It's also ourselves, the subcommittees, and how they're continuing to use our principles or this committee's principles. Kelly?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what's been said, and my experience from being on the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee is that, and some of the conversation happening at the full council level is that the other folks working on these elements really want to engage with equity, but they're still not quite sure how, even though, even with our wonderful just transitions principles and scoring rubric, they're not quite sure how. And they also are having trouble prioritizing that just with the sheer amount of bandwidth people have. Folks are just a little bit overwhelmed, and they have to consider so many factors. And so having someone who's there and wearing that just transitions hat and thinking about things through that lens is going to be really helpful. But yeah, again, it's really complex because a lot of these decisions are right at like the task group level, and you don't necessarily hear about them until they've been brought to the subcommittee and they're pretty fleshed out at that point. So Chris saying, let's try to get these task groups thinking about engagement is probably going to be a really important thing that a tool we could provide in addition to the just transition principles.
And Kelly, you were there. I mean, the transportation task group and the cross-sector mitigation, I mean, they were open to it, right? I mean, they pretty quickly. It wasn't a fight. It was,
yeah.
But clearly, it wasn't necessarily on their radar to tap the brakes. So all it took was a mention. It wasn't a heavy lift.
Yeah. Everyone seems really like they want to do these things, but they're not quite sure how. And there's so many different things vying for people's attention that it's hard to always remember that the equity is really crucial.
Okay, great. So there's a piece around accountability that seems very important to you all. And there clearly can be work that you all can do this year around that. Abby?
Yeah, I wanted to just build off what was shared. I wonder if there's something that this committee could think about that is a very simple sort of like 1, 2, 3 steps around encouraging the task groups to be able to engage the guiding principles. Sort of like, I think you created a really valuable framework, but if it still feels daunting or it still feels like it needs translation or has bandwidth concerns, I'm wondering if part of the focus can be around really distilling that to just a few high priority recommendations for each task group to consider. Or not even consider something more powerful than that, like actually implement.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So I wonder if, as an example of this, one of these task groups is the one that many of you are working on, or several of you are working on, which is around public engagement. And I think this is an example of something that you're going to want to really lean into this year. So several of you on this call here have been involved, including Kashka, Mona, Carrie, Kelly, Abby, Jane, Sarah. Several of you have been involved at one step or another. And so I think it'd be interesting to talk a little bit about this public engagement, because then it might weave into your bigger question about how you're interacting with the other task groups and others going forward. Why don't I do a quick overview, and then I'm going to ask those of you who have been involved in this to say a little bit about what's going on in this task group and what it might mean for you all as a subcommittee for the rest of the year. Hang on just one second. I'm going to pull a document up on my screen.
Well, David's do that. I'm going to jump in as the facilitator and say, it seems like we maybe need a little bit more for this conversation than we had imagined initially. And our meeting is set to adjourn at 5:30 today. I wonder if people are available to stay even till 5:35, and that will give us a little bit longer.
Sarah, when do we need to wrap this up?
5:05, but if we give you 5 extra minutes, you can go till 5:10.
Okay. Okay.
Let's do that. I see people nodding their heads and saying, yes, let's do that and have 10 more minutes for this section.
Okay. So in this task group that's been meeting, it's been looking at components of public engagement that's been asked for by you as a subcommittee and by the council. And I won't show again what we showed back in December, but those of you who are meeting in December with us, remember we showed you pieces out of that of our climate action plan that talked about the kind of engagement that you're looking for in 2022, which is more about building relationships and working through trusted community partners and doing things like that. That's what you've talked about. So in the task group, we've been trying to figure that out. And there's a 3-part process that's emerging from that conversation. And let me say what they are, and then I'm going to ask others to talk about the 3rd part. The 3-part process is, 1 is about making the plan as it is right now more accessible. And there's a lot going on around translation. There's a lot going on about making it like more easy to understand and interact with, like in better formats. And there's other pieces to sort of getting the plan itself easier to communicate to a wider group of people, right? So that's sort of 1 prong. The second, A&R is pretty much leading that. Jane and Marion and others are really pushing that forward with all the translation pieces and the better formatting and all that. The second prong is about doing some very sort of wide open online forums or meetings about the climate action plan and what's in it and what the work will be in 2022. And those are, and what's being requested there are a handful, say 1, 2, or 3 sort of big public virtual meetings about the plan, right? And that's more traditional in terms of the ways to do that, but also important to just be out there and transparent in talking about the plan. And that's something that my organization can help lead. The 3rd prong is where we need to focus our attention in particular, which is about targeted public engagement through trusted partner organizations. And this is where we've spoke several times about how to do this. We spoke again this morning in this small group. And I'm just putting 3 bullets up on the screen. It's actually a lot of text, so I apologize. It might be a lot to read. But the essence of this is that we're looking to reach out to some core communities that we have identified, you as a subcommittee have identified as historically marginalized communities or highly impacted communities, frontline communities, and find trusted organizations to work with or just trusted partners, whether it's an organization or not, and start having conversations that can project over time. It's less about, I need your feedback on the climate action plan, and more about how do we have a set of conversations about these issues that are in the climate action plan. How we heat our homes, how we drive to work, right, or get to work, how we prepare for events like heat waves and floods, etc. So we are actively right now trying to make a short list of communities and partner organizations that we can reach out to and begin to have these conversations and figure out how to have this meaningful engagement that could last over time. That's what's going on right now. And I would invite Mona or Kashka or Kelly or anybody else, Carrie, Sarah, others that have been involved, to say a little bit more about the intent behind what this effort is and what we hope to get out of it. So I just open it up to others that were involved in this morning's conversation or other conversations. Kasha, go ahead, please.
So this whole thing that began with, us trying to figure out, again, how to engage with marginalized communities, frontline communities. We have been meeting to really try to figure out a good way to build relationships. And that way, we have to start somewhere. So the idea behind these meetings, we've been trying to kind of focus in on, it's almost like I feel like it's kind of a pilot right now. So it's all in the planning stages, but trying to identify these core organizations that would help us get to these different groups, which would be frontline communities. And I don't know if you want to share that little list that we have come up with, and perhaps like other people in JT and who are in on this meeting could weigh in on who we're looking at. But this is basically for us to start building these relationships, because what I have found from working through Capstone Community Action and with Indra is that this just can't be a one point touch and go. This has to be a relationship building initiative, and that's how we're going to build trust, because there just really isn't any trust. I mean, I've made so many notes. People don't know where these conversations will go, who's going to hear them. So again, this is just the beginning of relationship building, and hopefully an ongoing effort to create trust, to show that there's real effort in making this change for equity. So that's what I have to say about that right now.
Thanks, Kashka. Absolutely. Yeah. Beverly?
Yeah, and and following up on that, the organizations that that we reach out to, that we trust, I think there also needs to be some effort into educating the organizations and talking to them about what just transition is about, and how letting them know how they can help, because they're going to be the ones who are going to put the word out to their communities and bring their communities in. So it's it's not just as easy as calling up local community center and saying, we're working with Just Transition, so we want to talk to your community about it. It's going to be a process. It's not something that's going to happen with 1 or 2 meetings. It could take the whole year. Building trust takes a long time, especially when trust has been violated. And I know in the Indigenous community that I come from, it is really, really hard to get the community to trust when the government's involved. And it's a slow process, but it can be done. I'm not saying it can't be done. It can be done. So, I would like to be a part of, that process, because I think it's really, really crucial.
That's really good to hear, Beverly. And I think where we're trying to go is to say, if we put our long-term hats on here, like we're building relationships over time, how could we demonstrate that working with a handful of partners and communities? And for instance, Beverly, if you could imagine how that might work among tribal communities in Vermont, who would we want to be working with to start saying, like, how do we have these conversations, right? What does that conversation look like? How do you structure it, right? Like, who do we work with to do that? And I think that's what we're trying to define right now, and need all the help we can get. Yeah. Okay. Others, I know, Mona, you had some important thoughts on this today too, when we were talking about it. Hang on one second. There you go.
Yes, I just said, please make the, the message simple and reach to the people without all these complications. You know, as I said, Vermont is not, you know, it is like 600,000 only. And, you know, just try to reach these people without all these, you know, groups in the middle and meetings. I think we spend all our time meeting and we did not do any like real reach out to these people. I think, you know, if we can just find out where is this people are, you know, localized or where they are, we can just do the reach out, you know, like ourselves, just reach to the people who speak their language and make focus group to meet with these people. And I think it will work beautifully, but you know, this is a government that will, you know, they have to do all these meetings and they have to make it complicated. I'm not sure why.
Yes, indeed. Right. So let us not get in our own way in just actually getting out and talking to folks, right? And using partners to do that, and not making such a big deal out of it, right? Yeah. Okay. Great. So this is happening, right? This is ongoing conversations, and we definitely welcome those of you who have not been participating in it, like other feedback about how to carry this work forward. This work will be moving forward in the coming weeks and months. And we're very eager to have the full Just Transition Subcommittee feel good about how it's going forward and be partners in it, like potentially Beverly working with us to think about where that pathway is with tribal communities and how to start having that conversation in a way that feels legitimate and fair. Kashka?
And in addition to everything that's been said, I think that we should put it out there that if anyone is in the know-how of any community events that are happening within their communities, that are potentially a way for us to have a liaison or to have somebody out there, I would be more than happy to be willing to go out there and listen and talk. But the more that we have people engaged, even from Just Transitions and people who sit in on these meetings and who can let us know there's this community event going on, because it has been rather difficult in the time of COVID to try to pinpoint events where people are gathering. So any help is greatly appreciated.
Sarah, I know you're probably eager to wrap this up. In terms of just the 20-second summary from me, it sounds like from a work plan standpoint, you all see a number of things you'd like to work on this year. The accountability piece is important. This public engagement piece is important. Likely some of you will get engaged in the municipal vulnerability piece. There's issues around data and tracking, which the Science and Data Subcommittee can be helpful on. Those are all things we can work on. And ideally, you all meet as a full subcommittee with some frequency, say at once a month, to keep track of how those different pieces are moving forward with task groups. So that's sort of my summary of where we're at. In this public engagement task group is a good example of that.
David, that was a helpful summary, and I think will help the co-chairs try to help this group move forward and think about how we organize our work. I want to shift to public comment, and I want to, Jane, did you just raise your hand?
I just wanted to ask a funny finer point that David mentioned, but we didn't really dive into, just the development of the Municipal Vulnerability Index. That's a statutory requirement that rests with the Rural Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee, but it's a cross-subcommittee task group that's working on now the development of an RFP to go out to actually think about a mapping tool to think about vulnerability and what that looks like, how we define that. It's very vague in the statute. I sort of have been paused on organizing the first task group of that, waiting for you all just to invite if someone from the subcommittee would like to join that task group. It feels very appropriate, and just wanted to put that out there, and I can follow up with an email. And Carrie, I don't mean to like publicly ask you, but I'm going to. It seems like your work with DEC and your touch point here also could be, if you were interested in helping us at least formulate some ideas at the beginning, you could serve that role. Anyone else on this subcommittee would be great to have as additions too. So just want to put that out there.
Great, and Carrie doesn't have to answer right now. She can follow up. And let's come back to that, because at the end we were going to talk about subcommittees, and we can kind of pull anyone else interested in that task group. I have been reminded by folks in the past that the agenda is actually following that feels important, because people, we have public comment periods. I really do want to pause. Chris, I saw your hand, but I want to pause and make sure we do have time for public comment. People have been listening into our meeting and patiently not joining into the conversation. If people have comments or questions that they want to add, go ahead. Okay. All right, hearing none. That gives us a little bit more breathing space to actually come together at the end of this meeting. Although public comments are welcome, I appreciate it from a time management standpoint. So great. So this last conversation is really around, and Chris, I'm sorry, I had cut you off. Did you have another comment there before we keep going?
I was just going to beg other members of the committee to participate in the vulnerable communities index work. As I put in the chat, that's a kind of dry name for how do we measure the needs, the issues and facing and needs of frontline communities. And that's where I know a lot of you guys have a lot of interest, and I'll likely be participating, or I'm going to ask to participate. That's a lot of what our work is about, but we really need, it would be really beneficial to have, like non-professionals engage in this. So please consider that. I think it'll be very interesting work. It's not, and as James knows, it's not just a mapping exercise. There'll be maps, but this is where we really get to, what are we measuring? What should we be looking at? What are the risks? What are the issues facing these communities? So not trying to add more to your pot, but I think this could be a really consequential point of engagement.
Thanks, Chris, for highlighting that. I think you're right. So if folks are wanting to dig into that and maybe think that could be where their energy lies, as opposed to one of these other task groups, that's great to be thinking about. Kelly, go ahead.
Quick question for clarification. If it's a task group, I believe that means that it doesn't fall under the per diem, where you would get $50 for the meeting, you would get the hourly rate for participating in the task group. And we've talked about how that should $6.50 or whatever it is not a very good hourly rate. But just before people jump in, knowing that that's the rate that you would be able to get as your per diem would be good. But if there's any movement on getting more funds for that, that'd be nice to know as well.
And yeah, go ahead quickly.
Just quickly, Kelly's right. Task groups aren't warned public open meetings, so they don't qualify for the $50 per diem. They only qualify for the prorated hourly rate. And David and others we're exploring possibility of trying to figure out a way to direct funding to CBI to support paying members a full per diem or something similar to that through CBI, and having it be a little differently defined than the way per diems work for the council and subcommittees. So stay tuned. We don't want the fact that we're trying to pivot into, but feels like at times more efficient groups with task groups to be a barrier for people who can't be there in their professional capacity.
More to come
And
on
just,
that.
sorry,
Thanks for looking at a solution.
yeah. Sorry, one other thing. I just want to say that also, because we are governed by the open meeting law, you know, the way that the task groups work really is intended to be in service to the subcommittees, and where decisions or things that need to be had by the full body in a public sector come forward, and they're advancing work in service to the subcommittees where the decisions on actions and recommendations are made.
Thank you. So in the last 10 minutes, well, I just want to call out, Beverly said she would be on the public engagement group. So I think Marion's maybe pulling that, or David pulling that group together. Great. I'm going to hand it over to Sue to kind of walk us through reviewing kind of where we're at. So go ahead, Sue.
Yeah, I know we only have a few minutes left, 10. And what we're trying to do is get sort of some coalesce around a few things. Number one, how often we want to meet and when. Number two, whether folks actually are wanting to stay in this committee, which I hope they are. And also if we can regroup on a few more additions to the committee. And to also talk a little bit about the co-chairs. So just starting with meeting times, we have a tradition of Thursdays. I personally have a problem with every fourth Thursday. So we've thought about either the second or the third Thursday, but to continue on a monthly basis. So I'm going to ask, you know, if people are still willing and interested in doing this on a monthly basis. At a minimum, I suggest we regroup next month, because I think we've talked about a lot of things. and I think we'd all want to follow up to see where we go with that. So I guess what I'd like to ask is for people to say if they are unavailable on the third Thursday of March, which is the 17th. So if you can put in the chat or speak to any challenges for March 17th. Isn't that St. Patrick's Day? That's exciting. Okay, that would be awesome to know that that is available, and we'll go with that. And at that time, we'll talk about how regularly we want to meet. Thank you. The other topic is just membership in general. You know, we've really lost a few people, and I want to just say thank you so much for those of you who are here today and sticking with this. You recall we had Nadia, who had to leave for a number of reasons. Eris, I think, is no longer available. Kaya is no longer here. Virginie is no longer here. Danielle is not here tonight, although I believe she may not. Haven't heard that she's not sort of wanting to stick with this, so we'll have to reach back out. But irrespective of Danielle, we're wondering if people can brainstorm to bring some more voices to our table. Many of you remember working with Indra, who has also been working on this. I've reached out to him to say, might he be interested? And I kind of wanted to see whether or not people were, you know, open and excited about the possibility of him becoming part of us. You know, I'm gonna ask for thumbs up, or yeah, okay, good. I'm gonna continue to try to recruit Indra. I was gonna reach out to Nadia as well. You know, she engages the Latinx community. She is from a different part of the state. I have no idea if she's available, but she comes back to my mind. But I wanted to know if anyone has ideas, and to ask you to brainstorm a couple more people, more voices to our table. And I don't think we have to brainstorm right now and share, but please be thinking about that. And we can actually, if any, and I think I see Jane's hand is raising. I think there is a process. If someone is to become a member, we actually have to present that person to the steering committee. So any membership changes, but we don't, we can still evolve through this. So I just want to say that. I'm going to say also, and the last thing we'll talk about is liaisons to the subcommittees that we were just talking about in the task groups. Co-chairs. So a very important announcement, which is that Sarah, who has just been an amazing leader of this group, has so much more on her plate than one can imagine, especially with the legislature, and has asked, and I've agreed, to let her step down from being the co-chair, but to remain a member of the committee, she said, which means that we have an opportunity for another co-chair. In fact, we have the opportunity to have more than one other co-chair, but we do want to make a recommendation for all of you to consider and approve, which is that we do have as part of, I don't think they're bylaws, but guidelines, agreements of our council, is that each of the subcommittees will have like a community member, maybe an appointee, and a member of the administration. So I've been recruiting there, and I'm very excited to mention that Abby Willard is willing to be that other person. And so I'm hoping that everyone will bless that idea. So, and just to really thank her, Abby's been such a fantastic asset and will continue to be. Not that she has a ton of time either, but she's willing to give this a go. And so if everyone, oh, thank you for the thumbs up. And I hope you feel the love, Abby. So we'll be sure to officially recommend that 2 thumbs up to Jane so that we can now officially recommend that to the steering committee. And I also will put out open, excited to recruit anyone else to becoming a co-chair. Jane, I'm going to stop talking and ask or share. You've had your hand up, so I want to make sure, and then we'll ask you, Beverly, for your comment.
Thank you. Really appreciative of Abby stepping in and your support for that. When you were talking about subcommittee membership, I just wanted to also highlight that Marion has put together, similar to the process that CBI supported last spring, a survey to have somewhat of an official nomination process for subcommittees. And the intent around that is so that we're not cherry picking people to serve on subcommittees, but making sure it's widely distributed and people can nominate. Both you all can nominate people you're thinking about, but then others can as well. And it doesn't have to be as big like as it was last time, but just so it's public and open so people can nominate themselves or others to join a subcommittee. We're going to talk about that on Monday with the steering committee. And maybe if you have just 1 minute, I'll let Marion describe how she's broken it out around special interests for certain subcommittees and see if there's anything you'd like to put in there.
Please do, Marion. Sorry, I didn't know anything about this.
That's all right. I think as we were starting to think about nominations, it became clear that there were many subcommittees looking for additional expertise and that it would benefit from a public process that we could share broadly with the subcommittees and the council. So just some examples, and this is something that you all could think about. For both the Rural Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee and the Science and Data Subcommittee, they've actually gone through and have identified specific areas of expertise or populations that they think haven't been well represented in their conversations over the past year that they would like to recruit for. So the way that the survey is structured right now is asking folks to either nominate yourself or someone that you know for a particular subcommittee and asking those folks to note if the person you're nominating has particular expertise or representation of a community or an organization or a group that the subcommittee has noted they have interest in having that voice at the table that they haven't had previously. So we're hoping that this gives us still that wide-reaching nomination process, but with a bit more of a targeted approach, understanding that, for example, Science and Data is really interested in someone with an economics background and someone with a background in resiliency metrics. And for Rural Resilience and Adaptation, they have a number of things, but really interested in someone that has experience working in vulnerable and frontline communities on resilience initiatives, as well as someone with housing expertise, for example. So if you all have specific ideas of voices you think you would like to highlight in the survey, I think that would be really helpful as we prepare to send it out next week. But we could also just leave it open as looking for general nominations for the Just Transition Subcommittee. Yes, lived experiences too. Exactly. Thanks, Sarah.
I am so happy that you are doing this, and I'm very relieved to hear, because we've been sort of scrambling to sort of get people here, which is absolutely inappropriate. So thank you for making a legitimate and accountable and a public process out of that. Okay, that is good. So I think what we need to do is talk about these subcommittees. We've mentioned the Municipal Vulnerabilities Index. Do people want us to, and is there more that we need to do, David, to actually ask people right now, or should people just sign up, send an email? How are we going to recruit information about who wants to be on what subcommittee?
So in terms of subcommittee liaison and working on the task groups, I think what we can do is over email, just make it a little more systematic and let people weigh in over that. I think doing it in real time is not going to work so well right now, but there will be opportunities for you to be more engaged in other subcommittees and in these specific task groups about the Municipal Vulnerability Index or the public participation thing that we're doing, transportation, biomass, et cetera. Well, why don't we do it over email soon?
So we'll be on the lookout for an email, and I think we'll have that email come from Abby. So you're all used to like hearing from Sarah, and from now on, you're going to be hearing from Abby to sort of have this sort of Just Transitions engagement connection. Thank you. Last thing is to make sure everyone is aware of this symposium that Sarah mentioned at the beginning, which is from UVM, and they're really interested in hearing from members of our subcommittee at this symposium, the date for which is March 20th from 4 to 5:30. They're looking for a panel discussion entitled Equitable Climate Action, Guiding Principles for a Just Transition. So Abby, what I think we can do in the email is ask if people are available, because if they're looking for a panel, we probably should put some thoughts together. And if people are interested in participating, we'll have you sign up, and then we'll maybe work a little bit. We have some time before March 20th to put those thoughts together. And
30th.
Guess what?
30.
The 30th, just to clarify, it's March 30th.
I can't see without glasses, I think. I can't see my own print in front of me. That's bad. Thank you. It is 5:35, which is when we said we would try to extend to. Is anyone have anything? I saw Beverly, you might have had your hand up before. Okay, it may have come down. Thank you all.
I was trying to figure out how to get it down. I don't know how to do those things.
You are getting really tricky. You got it up. I saw you with double thumbs up, and I've never done that. So I don't know how you did that.
I don't know how I did it either.
Everybody, thank you. It's so meaningful to just gather, even if it's virtually. We have so much that we've actually done, even though it doesn't feel necessarily that way. But we do have a lot to do. And I think we're a really good group. And I really appreciate it, especially the discussion around accountability and what is our role. We've got a lot to do. We've got people to do it. We're going to get more people around our circle, and we're going to keep going. So thank you all for what you do and who you are. Stay safe. And I like to say this, wearing a mask is a sign of love. Okay. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.
Take care, everybody.
Take care. See you. Bye.